Good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to welcome everyone to our afternoon session on day 2 of the CP State Virtual Annual Conference. Before we get started, we'd like to thank our sponsors and corporate partners for their significant generosity during this challenging year. CP State and our 24 statewide affiliates appreciate all you do to support direct service providers and those with complex disabilities. Thank you goes to the Beacon Group, Focus Wealth Management, Total Care RX. Please contact the CP State offices for more information should you wish regarding any of our sponsors. We'd also like to thank the Evero Corporation for their continued support of CP State and by making our Zoom platform possible for the 2020 virtual conference. This afternoon, we're excited to have our panelists with us for this interesting topic, cultural aspects of the workplace, diversity and inclusion. With us today are Elaine Angelo, a performance consultant at ProKnowledge, Rachel Harris, Assistant Director of Human Resources at CP Nassau, Delphia Howes, owner of D-House Solutions and Executive Director of Equity and Diversity at the University of Tennessee System, Maureen O'Brien, President and CEO of New York State Industries for the Disabled. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
An ever-evolving workforce across all fields, including recent events, have displayed how significant diversity and inclusion are to the success of any organization. As a reminder to our session participants, if you would like to engage with our panelists, kindly put your questions in the Q&A areas and the moderator will provide your questions to the panel throughout the session. Attendees will be muted during the session. Thank you. And Elaine, as moderator, if you'd like to take over, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. We appreciate it. So by way of introduction, I'm going to have each one of us kind of respond to our very first question, all right, which is, how would you define the culture of your organization? And how do your mission and core values reflect that? So I'm going to start us off. Bill already introduced us by name. And so I am a performance consultant for ProKnowledge. And as such, and let me get myself in here. As such, what we find ourselves in the position of doing is determining and assisting people in the skill sets that they need. Our diversity is shown in terms of the skills and needs that people have, and the diversity is also reflected in terms of the types of clients that we work with. Everything from New York State agencies to nonprofits like CP of New York State, to family-run organizations, associations, et cetera, who they themselves have very diverse populations. And not in terms of necessarily a traditional sense of diversity, but also in terms of diversity of thought. I can work with people who look exactly like each other, may share the same age, generation, gender, race, et cetera. But they're all very, very different because of their diversity of thought. And it's not until you get into the classroom and you're facilitating a session when you realize truly that our diversity is more than just what we look like, who we may love, who we may worship, et cetera. But it is also, especially in the workplace, about understanding how people look at and approach work differently. And it's not till you get into the classroom with folks that you realize just how significant that is. And so we provide a different level of services and opportunities to work with different types of people, but for different needs and to develop different skill sets. And that's how we look in terms of our diversity and how we empower people and empower their self-sufficiency. So that's what we do. So Delphia, if you would talk to us a little bit about your consultancy and answer the question for us about defining your culture in your organization.
Sure, great. Thank you so much. So diversity for me, my organization is one that I have had the pleasure of building over the past 5 to 7 years. And the focus obviously is diversity and inclusion, working with organizations and individuals to help them focus on understanding and creating awareness and strategies around it. With that, for me, the culture is me, right? So the culture is really defined for this particular organization in terms of what the business need actually is and what it looks like. So culture is those norms, those customs, all of those things that align with the way in which we identify diversity and inclusion. So when I think about culture, it really has everything to do with the core values, the core of the organization. For me as a consultant in this role, the responsibility is for me to find those connecting pieces to help to create strategies for us to move forward. And my role as the executive director at University of Tennessee System, which is a new role for me. This is, a role that I've taken the lead on for approximately 3 weeks. And so the opportunity to really find the core values, the core culture within the entire system of Tennessee is interesting, because there are different dynamics in each of the 3 regions of Tennessee. And so that the culture looks very different from one area to the other. However, the unified message is the message of diversity, appreciation, and inclusion. And so having that as a core element in terms of the culture is very strong within this organization. And I think it would really help to have others understand that the distinction in culture can be prevalent in within any organization, depending on geographic, different elements of diversity. So long-winded answer, but culture is very essential in everything that I do.
All right. And congratulations on your new role. I think there's nothing better in a career is to find an organization that you're aligned with in terms of who you are too.
Yes, thank you.
Maureen?
Sure. New York State Industries for the Disabled, or NYSID, we work with 135 disability service providers around the state to create job opportunities for individuals of all abilities. We are constantly advocating for companies, for the state, for local governments that contract with us to look at people's skills and abilities rather than their disabilities. And that's really what our culture is here. It is based on what are people's skills, how do those skills fit into the jobs that we have here at NYSID. I have 71 employees in total here on staff. And I find that promoting mutual respect as the culture here has worked really, really well. I always joke with our team that when we're about to do mandatory HR training, that if everybody treated each other with mutual respect, we would never have to do HR training. We wouldn't have to tell each other how to talk to each other, how to interact with each other. If you just respected how everybody saw the world a little bit better, we'd have a pretty nice work environment. I think that my team really does embrace that here, and it's a fantastic place to work. And I think when we think about the mission that we do, it also makes it a super place to work. So not only do you have this great mutual respect as a core competency and value inside the house, by what we do outside the house, you're feeling very engaged and very involved in the work that we do. You're muted.
Rochelle, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. It's actually an opportunity for me to speak on CP Nassau's culture and how our mission and our core values reflect that. CP Nassau has a culture of its own. And when you think of culture, as Delphia was explaining, it's a way of life for a group of people. So our culture does consist of a group of people that share our company's values and that engage together in order to fulfill our mission. And it's a diverse group of people. And it's when you bring everyone together that you're able to maximize your outcomes. And if I could describe CP Nassau's culture in 3 simple words, I would describe it as together we shine. And I say that because oftentimes you think of, as individuals, you may have heard the saying, as individuals we sparkle, but together we shine. And when you have a diverse group of people that have one goal coming together, you're going to have optimal results. And what's amazing about the culture at CP Nassau is that it's recognized at day one. And when you think day one, you may think of, the first day on the job or the first day in orientation. But I can say in my own experience, that day one is truly soon as you step foot in any one of our sites, whether it's a main building, one of our residential locations, you get a sense of the culture immediately. And there's this welcoming feeling that it reflects the way of life in the organization. And what's amazing is I can almost go back to when I first stepped foot into the agency 14 years ago and still recall the feeling that I had. And when it went full circle for me, that I realized that culture is something that's learned and it's generational. I'll just speak on this one example. Early on in 2020, I had the opportunity to shadow our assistant executive director, Karen Geller-Hittleman, in an orientation session. And she talks on culture in the agency, and she asks these new hires, what was their first impression or experience walking into, our agency. And what was amazing to me was that the individuals in this orientation class listed almost exactly what I listed 14 years ago, of that welcome, inviting feeling, that people were greeting you at the door. One individual, and I always recall this, and I said, it's amazing, reflected on their experience that they got lost in the hallways and they didn't come across someone that just pointed them in the direction of where they needed to travel. They didn't say, oh, make a left there and then a right there, but the individual actually walked them to where they needed to be. And that was just representative of, who we are as an agency and the culture that's within. And it truly is a way of life. And if I could tie in how our mission and values reflect that, our mission is that we provide the highest quality services to individuals, and that we provide services to children and adults in our agency. And just the fact that it starts with we means that it's not one person. Culture is not created by one person, but instead it's some person recognizing that they have to do it with a group of people, that we must do this. So it's amazing that it's embedded in our mission that it takes a team of people, a diverse group of people coming together with one goal, to achieve optimal results. And we allow our values to guide us. And you can't go wrong with, following your values and, applying your mission and ensuring that you establish a deep ingrained culture in your foundation. And I believe we're able to do that successfully.
Great. Thank you, Rochelle.
I think my answer was more long-winded than Delphia's.
Okay. All right. So if are we going to a contest here? So we might be on a contest here. And I can tell you, I can beat out both of you. When you talk for a living, right? So we must be hitting some high points because we already have a question, and it's a great question. And that is, somebody's asking us, and it's a great follow-up here. What comes first, culture or diversity? So Delphia, why don't you get us started with that? What do you think?
So, that is a fantastic question. And I've been asked that question a number of times. And, I have to say that I have vacillated with my response at times, but I'm the older I get, the more mature I get and the more experience I gain, I think I become a little more clear on my perspective on this. And so it's the old adage, the chicken or the egg, right? But I really don't think that aligns, because diversity, and Rochelle said it perfectly, diversity comes from the individual, right? And so you can't create an environment unless you have more than one individual in a space. If you have more than one individual in a space, then you absolutely have diversity. I don't care if they're twins. I don't care if the individuals were raised in the same house, same parents, slept in the same bed, whatever the case may be. there are elements of diversity between two individuals. So you have, in my opinion, you know, if I had to choose which came first, I would say diversity has to come first. You have to have those elements of difference and similarity and, you know, diversity of thought, all of those things that eventually begin to create and blossom into the culture once you bring other elements and other individuals of different diversity perspectives into play. So that's where I am at this point in my career. I do believe that diversity has to come first because diversity is about the individual. And if you don't have individuals in an environment, you don't have culture.
All right, so the people walk in every day with their diversity, but they're the ones who then build the culture.
Absolutely, absolutely. They
One
now
thing to add, Maureen, on the culture end, I also think that that's the leadership part of it. So
right,
whoever's
that's just what
leading your organization has to drive that diversity in the culture. This is the way we're going to do it. There's no questions asked. You know, you can't waver on it. You can't sit still on it. You can't make it a minimal goal. It has to be a broad goal that's embraced by everybody. And you have to drive that forward, because if you don't, you won't be successful in anything else.
And if I can add to that, not only embraced by everyone, but it has to be inclusive of everyone. And I think that that's a core piece, because you can have a group of leaders that say, hey, this is going to be our culture. This is going to be the way that it is. That doesn't include the perspectives, the diversity that, you know, the whole gamut holds. And so I think that, you know, here we are bringing it all together. We've mentioned diversity, we've mentioned inclusion, we've mentioned culture, you know, it all goes hand in hand.
It does.
Yeah. Rochelle, you want to add to that?
I think they got it covered. I will be repeating what they said.
Okay. All right. So it's a great segue, what Delphia just said, because she talked about inclusion. Our next question is, so what does your organization do then to make sure that everyone feels included? And use some stories, be specific with us. What, give us some of those examples. How about Maureen? You get us started on this one.
Sure. So everyone that works in an environment is a unique person, and they bring a specific set of skills to the job that they do. And I think being inclusive is understanding what those skills are and what the unique talents of each of those folks are, and allowing them to be authentic in the workplace. You know, I think probably 5 or 6 years ago, I started hearing the buzzword authentic leadership for the first time. And really what it is that you're no different than you are at work than you are outside of work. You know, there used to be a work persona, and then you'd go home and there's the home persona. I think you're inclusive when you allow everybody to be whoever they are at work every day, and you allow them to be their authentic self. What I find happens is when you allow that, people are more productive, people are happier on the job, people want to come to work because they feel like they're part of a community, they're part of a group. When you suppress that, then you don't feel that. And I think it's been super hard during the pandemic. Those type of connections that you have at work, that's hard because we're not having that right now. We're doing it over Zoom. You're not, you know, sitting down for a meal together. I feel like, you know, we do group lunches, we do department lunches, a lot of that stuff. You lose a little of that when you go remote. But I think there are specific things you can do in those kind of group functions to make people feel included and allow them to be their authentic selves.
Great. And Rachel, in what ways is CP in Nassau? What ways do you think you're making people feel more included? And be specific about either programs or practices.
Sure. You know, it's a great question, because not until you're presented with a question like this may you stop and think about, you know, what your organization does to make sure everyone feels included. You know, oftentimes we don't pause and stop and reflect on that, but it's nice to do so. When thinking about CP Nassau, we have a team of administration executives that, as Maureen mentioned, are authentic themselves. And when you have authenticity in your leadership, it's something that is appreciated by many. And not only do you see it reflected in your leadership, you then know as employees or anyone affiliated with the organization that you too can present your authentic self. Immediately hearing the question, I started brainstorming on ways that we want to make sure that employees feel included. And that's by being invited to participate in committees so that their voices are heard, or our voices are heard. Attending events, and having the opportunity to do so and engage with other employees throughout the agency. Keeping employees in the loop with, all staff emails and ensuring that they're not missing anything. You don't want to have an employee that doesn't know what's going on. And ultimately, I think what our organization does really well in making sure that employees feel included is by communication alone. We have an executive director, Bob McGuire, who was on the leadership panel this morning discussion, and communication came up there as well. And it's so important that to have a leadership in place that connects with employees as valued stakeholders, that wants to have the feedback from the employees, from the full workforce, every member, whether it's the duration of employment, how many years you've been in the organization, the position that you hold, and other ways that that's done well is not just by email blasts, but especially during the pandemic, whether it may be videos on our social media platforms. Prior to COVID, employees had the opportunity to sit at roundtable discussions with the executive director, assistant executive, pretty much everyone in our whole team. They were welcome to attend the state of the agency meetings and open to that discussion so that they can share their opinions based on what's going on. Meet and greets one-on-one with management. We have an open door policy to ensure that employees know that their voices can be heard. Not only that they have a voice, but it will be heard and their feedback will be received. And I think that's just the core piece of making sure employees feel included is the communication and being able to just make discussions whenever they like.
Great. And Delphia, how have you seen it done with your clients? But I can also ask you, in the unique position you are in, just transitioning into your new role, what are some of the things you've already seen there that reflect inclusivity, and what are you planning?
Yes. So I think this is a great question, because I think when we boil it down and really look at it, it's about listening, right? Being able to listen to your employees and actually creating a forum or a space for individuals to bring their authentic selves and their authentic thought so that their voices can be heard. I love what Rochelle said. Again, I keep following you and saying I love what you said, but it's true. The voice of the individuals need to be heard. And as an organization, the organization needs to provide those platforms for people to be able to share their voices. It's so important for the organization, obviously, to listen. So through surveys, through pulse surveys, through inclusive UBI indexes, to really understand what's the sentiment in the organization and the feeling with regard to how people feel connected, how they feel they belong, how they feel they are included in the organization, through all those other factors that have already been said, communication, all of those things are necessary, but ultimately the individual needs to simply feel that they are heard. I also think, what I'm seeing now, what I've seen in other organizations and with my clients, is that being able to create an entry point, different entry points for individuals. So not every person is going to engage in this whole element of culture, diversity, et cetera, in the same way. So the organization has to be able to provide different ways for people to be included, whether that's through book clubs, whether it's through outreach, whether it's through employee resource groups or employee business groups. There has to be different modes and mechanisms for people to be able to say, hey, I see myself in this organization and I can enter and bring my authentic self in this way. I don't have to do it that way, but I can still be valued and feel the value of the organization. So there has to be multiple points of entry, and that element of truly listening and actively finding ways to help people to share their voice.
Great, thank you. I know that as you're transitioning, I'm sure these are things that are top of mind. There may be things you're seeing already, and then there are things that you'd like to see in the future, and that's going to be something well within your control, which is, as I was saying before this started, there's nothing better in a career than to know you've landed someplace that's in alignment with who you are. And I love that term, the authentic self. We're not always in places where we feel that way. And I think that that's the core of it, absolutely. So let's move on to another question. And this is about how diversity intersects with inclusion. A lot of people tend to think they're the same thing, or one means you have the other. Not necessarily true. Just because we have diversity does not necessarily mean that everyone feels included. I bring my diversity to work with me every day. Do I feel included in the workspace that I'm in? That may be a different story. So my question is what does that look like? What does the inclusion piece of this look like and mean for your employees with some specific examples? Rochelle, you want to get us started?
Sure. And luckily we've touched on inclusion already. And in my opinion, that's the important piece. When I think about CP Nassau, we definitely have a diverse workforce, workforce full of talented individuals. And, it's not until you incorporate or intersect with inclusion that you're able to maximize your potential. And oftentimes, when someone thinks about diversity, a lot of times our minds automatically draw to race and gender. However, there are so many characteristics, primary and secondary, diverse characteristics. Of course, we know the protected characteristics of age, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, race. However, there are also secondary characteristics that represent our diversity, and that may be religion, language, education, communication style. So when I think about our workforce, it's definitely a diverse workforce. However, just having diversity alone is not enough. It's the intersecting of the diversity and the inclusion that's key. And automatically, I just think about sports teams. I only played basketball. I don't know all sports teams, so I can't I know some positions in football and baseball, but I'll just make it general. But on any sports team, you're going to have players that play different positions. So you're combining players that have diverse heights, skills, athletic abilities, and many other characteristics. And it's nice to have a diverse team. Already having diversity included in any team, you have an advantage because you're bringing in all these different components and not all like-minded people. However, it's not, you can put a diverse team on a court or a field or in an arena and say, go play. And they're not going to optimize their results. And not until the players learn to work with each other and play off each other's skills and get to know the likes and dislikes or the strengths and the weaknesses of the players on their team are they able to have those improved outcomes. So, when I, think about at CP Nassau and how that intersecting looks, I think it comes in many forms. I can think of the committees that, where employees have the opportunity to engage with members in the agency from different departments. It may not even be within your one department. Sometimes there's brainstorming that takes place that brings everyone together, the team building, whether it's attending agency events, employees participating in the strategic planning for the future of the agency. There are definitely opportunities that are available to employees to have that diversity intersect with inclusion, so that all of the employees, again, it makes me remember that no matter what role you play, you're an integral part of the future of the individuals, the children and adults that we're serving. And there's so many ways that that can be done in an organization, and ensuring that they include all employees, all affiliates, all contributors, volunteers, the individuals that are being supported, ensuring that they get together, because until you put everyone together to work together, will you have those improved outcomes?
Right. And so I'm gonna, forgive me for doing this, I'm gonna add on a part 2 to that, because we got a great question submitted. And since we're talking about inclusion, the question is so what role does race play in inclusion and equity? And there is an increased focus within this last 6 months of all of the things that have been going on. I think a heightened awareness for people. So you said it's not always about those primary characteristics like race. Race falls into that category. But what role does race play when it comes to inclusion and equity, in your opinion? And I'll ask all 3 of you to kind of add this in or weave this in with your answer about what inclusivity looks like in your organization.
So I'll go ahead, since I just finished speaking. And looking at what role race plays, race is one of the many protected characteristics that represent us as individuals and make us diverse. It's important that sometimes we don't narrow our focus down to just one characteristic that may represent someone. You may fill a room with people of the same race, but as Delphia mentioned before, there's diversity within that. So it's not, you can't pin it down to one characteristic that represents us differently in the inclusion. It's hard to pinpoint it as one specific item when it's one characteristic that's representative of who we are as people.
Absolutely. Delphia, what would you add to that?
You know, again, Rochelle said it wonderfully, but I do want to add, you know, to the first part of the question, in terms of where's the intersectionality of diversity and inclusion. You know, we've all heard the saying, you know, diversity is being at the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. I disagree with that. Inclusion is being able to say, hey, I hate this freaking music and I want to play, you know, I'd like to hear something else, and being respected about your thought of being, you know, having a different view and being and still being included. So it takes it an extra step when you talk about that intersectionality, where you're actually bringing people along where they can truly contribute to the success or to the orientation of the environment. And I think that's what's important to realize, is that it's not just, you know, having people at the table and saying, okay, you have a fork to eat with. No, you have to allow that voice to be a part of the environment, et cetera. Where does race play a role in it? Well, we know where we are in our society, and we know where we have been in our society for you know, a very, very long time. I think that it's incumbent upon employers and organizations to realize that, to have that awareness, and to really focus on how do we hear the sentiments of those individuals who are feeling pain, shame, concern, exhaustion around this whole conversation around race. I think that I can share a very practical, an example that just recently happened. So before, long story short, before I transitioned to UT, I was at Syracuse University in a human resource role, leading that. And I had an individual who actually said to me, Delphia, and this was after Mr. Floyd had, you know, left this earth unnecessarily, but he said to me, he said, you know, I've been with this organization for over 20 years, African-American male. And he said, you know what, not one person has checked in with me, not one person. People that I've worked with for all of this time, people that, you know, I've been to their house, I've been out to eat with them, all of these things. And in this heightened moment of sensitivity with regard to race, no one has checked in with me. And this man cried. And it wasn't tears of, you know, someone had hit him or hurt him. He was emotionally hurt and scarred because that level of inclusion, that he thought was there was not actually demonstrated. And so what I say with regard to inclusion and understanding race and the dynamics of diversity, we have to be cognizant, to be open, to be comfortable, to have the dialogue around this topic, because people are suffering. And if we're not empathetic enough to be able to listen and allow a voice and a forum for the voices to be heard, to be included, so again, they can continue to contribute to success, we're missing the boat.
We're talking about very difficult conversations to have, and I think sometimes the thought does occur to someone, you know, I wonder what he's going through in your example, right? I wonder what he's going through. But then the next thought immediately follows thereafter for someone, which is, am I putting him on the spot? Maybe he doesn't want to talk about that. Maybe that would be embarrassing to him. Maybe he doesn't. And so you automatically cancel the original empathetic thought that you had, that I should go and ask them, or we're just having lunch and I should say, what do you think about what's going on? How does that, but you immediately cancel it because there's another voice that immediately follows. Does anybody?
Yeah, Elaine, I'll just, that if you're your authentic self all the time at work, that's not going to cancel. So you're going to automatically say, I got to go talk to that person and I have to have that conversation. So if you are yourself every day, this is the way it's going to be. I also think, you know, Delphia's comments on getting a seat at the table, being at the table and where they intersect are super important, because you can be a diverse organization. You can have 40% of your workforce diverse. They can feel included. But I'm going to add another word here. Until they have equity and they can move freely within the organization from one position to another, you don't really have a diverse and inclusive organization. You know, one of the things that I did here that we did at NYSID that's been an incredible program is a tuition reimbursement program. So I have some extremely bright women of color who work in this organization who could move up the ladder in the organization, but there are jobs that you must have a college degree for, or you must have an advanced degree for. So we started a tuition reimbursement program, and I could not be more proud of, I've had 4 women, 3 were single mothers, 3 were of color, who have gone through this program and now have an associate's or a bachelor's degree, and now can do other things. They're not stuck in a clerical job. They're not stuck in a job where they'll be in for the rest of their lives. They can rise up in the organization and they can have both equity and decision-making authority.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything you'd add there, Michelle? Because we kind of went into another spot in terms of difficult conversations and initiating them, which I'm sure in your organization, especially being in an HR practitioner's role.
Yeah, I have to agree with Delphia and Maureen. They definitely hit the nail on the head, and ensuring that individuals are heard and checked in upon. Delphia touched on that and the importance of understanding what's happening in the world around us. It's ever evolving. And it's important that, you know, from the type of positions where, you know, if you're someone who does have a seat at that table, or you're an administrator or executive, to stop and check in. And it is essential. And they both hit the nail on the head. And it's definitely an important conversation to have, and to ensure that your workforce, whether they're the race that, you know, may be on the spotlight or not, but to ensure that everyone feels supported and how they feel being a part of the organization.
Great. And we are, the audience here is fantastic today, because they are just boom, like snowballing off of these topics and everything. So somebody else asked, and we've just kind of been going on the perimeter of it. So what measures can we take to ensure that staff are being heard? And more importantly, and this comes from what's called these days, it's the latest buzzword, but I use it a lot and I love this term, and are ensured to have some psychological safety, meaning they are not retaliated against for having an opinion that might be different from other people's, or they're not retaliated against for bringing something up that might be unpopular, or they are pushing back on something and questioning something, especially someone in a position of authority, perhaps. how do we ensure that voices are heard without the fear of consequences? Why don't you start us off, Marie?
So we have at NYSED a private line that you can go to that's monitored by the outside. So you can make a individual private complaint if you have a complaint. You can make an individual or private comment. We also have a compliance person who handles certain aspects of complaints that wouldn't necessarily work with HR. I mean, I would also add, it's against the law to retaliate against anybody who may have a different opinion. So, you know, if you're running an organization, you want people to have different opinions because you're better when you have people with different opinions. And you have to show that that's valued. A very simple thing we do here that I think is cognizant of that is we do a thing called the Bravo Awards. It's tiny, it happens twice a year, but employees can nominate other employees who have helped them do something extraordinary within the course of a 6-month period at NYSED. It gives people a voice to say, I really appreciate what someone did for me or how they helped me when I needed paperwork done for something or I needed background research done. It gives them the ability to speak out. And I think those are like the first steps. If they feel comfortable talking about another employee and how they helped them, it makes it easier for someone to feel comfortable about talking about almost anything. But you've got to give them that room and those spaces where they can say those things and feel comfortable with them.
Oh, great. And Maureen, that line that you were talking about, that people can either submit concerns, complaints, maybe even suggestions. It's a third party that gathers that, correct? And
yeah, so it's a third party. And we also make that available to both our member agencies. So NYSED's a member organization. So if we have a member agency we're working with that feels that same way, and maybe they don't feel like they can come directly to me, or they can go to our chief counsel, or they can go to our compliance officer, they can come in through this avenue.
Okay.
And there's a committee at the board that reviews those. So again, it stays, sorry, that I get what you're driving at, Elaine, sorry. So it goes to a ethics and compliance committee of my board of directors.
Fantastic. And then they are given out like as action items that someone's
It's an action item. They'll review it in confidence and privately, and then they'll decide the best way to handle it and how they would reach out to that organization or that person.
So that's a great communication tool.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Delphia, what have you come across in terms of that and understanding how people can be ensured not to be retaliated against, and whether it's the legal definition of that or just in general feeling like their opinion, no matter what that opinion is welcome?
Maureen hit it on the head. I think having an ombuds line, an external source, is very, very important because people need to feel comfortable. What I've seen with those is, you know, sometimes it can go both ways. You have to have that committee, so to speak, that unbiased committee that can actually review the information in a way that is fair and equitable in the vein in which it's been shared. But I do want to say that I think that we go back to one of your first questions. It's the culture. Right? If you have a culture that is closed, that does not have those parameters in place, that does not have, you know, a space where people feel safe, you're not going to, there's not going to be anything that you could possibly do to get that type of involvement for employees. So you have to have a culture, you have to create a culture that is open. And for most of our organizations here in the United States, that's a transition, because many of them do not have that open perspective. So companies need to begin to transition to having that open culture where people feel as if they can provide their information. I think the second piece is that, or maybe the third piece, I forgot which number I was on, but they have to they have to have a stated expectation with regard to that. And what I mean, not a directive, not you know, some type of check and balance, but through the culture, it needs to be stated from leadership to management through all lines within the organization, what this looks like, excuse me. And it also needs to be demonstrated, because that's going to help to continue to solidify the culture and reinforce the culture that you're trying to change. So I think that, with those three things, at minimum, just understanding that that's very minimum, that can at least begin the momentum to get things moving in a positive direction.
Right. And Rochelle, how is that level of transparency? How is that seen at CP of Nassau in terms of the people feeling free to express their opinion without any fear?
I love that Delphia. I think we all love what the person before us said. I love that Delphia touched on the culture, and that is so true. That once you create a culture of, inform the employees that their voices will be heard. Sometimes it comes in the form of that open door policy. The opportunity to know that if you're not being heard by your manager, that you can go to human resources or even the executive director as needed in order to ensure that you are heard. And oftentimes employees often go to the manager that's above them when they're faced with any kind of challenge or difficulty. So one thing that is important is ensuring that your managers receive that supervisory training to know what to do when an employee comes to you presenting that they're having a difficult time or that they're experiencing something. And it's so important to remind the employees, your entire workforce, and everyone affiliated with the organization of the policies and procedures that are in place. Like we touched on, that they're legal matters. And it's also just important that it's written in your company's policies that you're going to protect individuals from discrimination and ensure that those policies are adhered to. And that's just essential that you convey that clearly and be transparent with the entire workforce and everyone involved, that there is something that will not be tolerated. Discrimination will not be tolerated, nor will retaliation, because as Maureen mentioned, it's illegal. But it's important that everyone involved understands that, and you train anyone that has a hand in your organization.
Great. So there was another part to this that I think this is a good place to bring it in, and then we'll move on to another question, which is, how do you connect or apply the basics or the basic skills of emotional intelligence with how people look at diversity and inclusion in an organization? So when we think about emotional intelligence, we think of the basic skills of self-awareness and self-management, how I handle myself in a certain situation or when I'm triggered by a certain person or a situation, my social awareness of how other people are feeling. And that's what Delphia was talking about with the gentleman that she worked with, that somebody, he felt lonely, to be perfectly honest. He felt ignored by the fact that no one had touched base with him or checked in with him regarding how he might feel during all of this and the unrest that was going on. So how do you pick up on that? That's a piece of emotional intelligence, is your ability to pick up on the emotions of other people, how they're kind of off, or what are you looking at, and being able to tap into that. Delphia, you want to start a little bit on how you can tie those two together?
So emotional intelligence aligned with inclusion, that's
with diversity and inclusion, yes.
Yeah. So, whenever I do trainings, develop strategies, et cetera, I always take it from an internal perspective first. So, if I have a client or I'm working with an organization that says, we need to increase our diversity representation. No, that's not going to get us anywhere. We need to understand where we're coming from first so that we can understand how our perspectives and biases, as we all have, are going to have an impact on the way that diversity comes in the door and in the way that the diversity is treated once it comes into the door. So I believe that emotional intelligence aligns directly, but at a very foundational basis, because it has to come from inside. There has to be that awareness, that clarity, that understanding of all of those triggers, all of those elements of comfort, discomfort, how we treat and interact with one another has to be first before we can begin to truly understand how we can impact the environment. If we don't understand that first for ourselves, then any opportunity around diversity and inclusion, in my opinion, is going to fail simply because there's not clarity. And I speak about always being clear in your direction, your communication, your, all of those things around what we're talking about. You can't get that clarity unless you have clarity inside first.
Yeah, absolutely. Rochelle, add to that in terms of that connection between the two, in your opinion.
I agree with Delphia again. It definitely, you definitely have to have the emotional intelligence yourself. However, as we may be aware that there are so many components of emotional intelligence, and you may have a strength in a specific area that, other individuals may not. So sometimes I think it may clash when, you may have someone who's looking for someone to identify that there's something wrong, yet they've identified within themselves because they have that awareness, and they have the need to express what they're feeling, because sometimes you may not realize that although you may be emotionally intelligent, that does not mean that the world around you is. So if you have the ability to recognize your own needs and like Delphia mentioned, things within yourself, you never want to have assumptions of what someone needs to be doing to meet your needs. So it is important that, within yourself, that you're able to identify what your needs are and to improve on your emotional intelligence skills as much as possible. And when it comes to an organization, I know at CP Nassau, we've actually done training on and reading materials that we've shared amongst, our workforce on emotional intelligence. And that's key, because there are times when you read something that you say, wow, I identify with that. So it goes back to that training that's so essential, that universal training presented to your entire workforce and everyone affiliated, so that everyone does have that common language within, so that you would say, okay, I after reading this, I can see that I recognize something, and everyone is on the same page. So I go back to the importance of the training of emotional intelligence amongst your entire team, so that you can, pretty much maximize on the knowledge of it and what it comprises of.
Yeah.
Can I just echo something that Rochelle said? With regard to the training, it is so critical that it is the entire team. So many organizations leave emotional intelligence training to the top echelons within the organization, and it never cascades down in a way that's meaningful. So to the extent, if any of you out there are looking at doing that, do that for your entire team. Don't segment it off, because you're literally chopping an arm off when you just
absolutely. And that is a good segue to Maureen, because in her organization, and you can speak about this better than I can, Maureen, you have a tip program that is available to both your corporate partners and to your membership organizations, and you offer emotional intelligence within that. So you want to talk a little bit more on the importance of that?
Yeah, I mean, and I worry a little bit about the economic environment that we're going into now for nonprofits, because you can't not spend money on this.
Right.
So if you get rid of your training budget, if you get rid of continuing education, you're not investing in your people to make them better. This group of people on this call, clearly, we all have emotional intelligence. We're all self-aware. Not everyone's built that way. So you may end up with a fantastic employee who can do the job and has the skills, but is horrific at interaction with other people, that doesn't read a room, that doesn't, there's things you have to do to help that person be the team player that you want them to be. As you said, Elaine, we have a training and improvement program here at NYSID. We fund it completely, and we allow our member agencies to participate in it. So even if you don't have contracts through NYSID, if you are a member agency of NYSID, you and any of your employees can participate in the TIP training programs that we do. The emotional intelligence thing, it is not innate to everybody. And it's a really important thing to cultivate in people. Again, it is innate to certain people, but not everybody. And it's a huge thing that can change your culture if people can just look at someone and have a realization, okay, maybe I needed to ask that question a little bit differently. Maybe I need to, give this person a wide berth today. Clearly something's not right. But you don't have people that naturally know how to do that. So you've got to train them.
Absolutely. And we're getting a question that actually correlates to one of the questions that we have. I'm going to skip over one and I'll come back to it. We're starting to approach 2 o'clock. And that is what made you realize within your organizations that it was time to take action regarding diversity and inclusion and equity initiatives? And one of the people asked in our Q&A, what are your recommendations on how to transition, on how to move your culture in that direction? So Rachel, would you start us off with that? I know you've talked about the what. How did you decide? Was there a particular event, or where did it come from?
It's challenging to think of, taking the first step. At least for me, I believe that the first step was taken years ago before my time. I believe that, like we've mentioned, that the organization is built on diversity and inclusion, and that's one of the pillars for our organization. And so I believe the first step happened well before then. However, we know that when looking at our policies and procedures, that there was a process over time that made the agency incorporate such policies to ensure that our practices and our conduct is on a non-discriminatory basis. And relating it to our current day and age, it is a journey. I think journey represents it well, because journey represents something that there's continued movement. And with our ever evolving workforce and the world around us, I think our obligation is to continue to revisit those policies and procedures to ensure that they are respectful to all people, regardless of the protected characteristics. And that's the piece that organizations have to keep in mind, that just because you have a policy in place, it may not be inclusive or represent everyone or everything that is going on. So I think it's key. The step is to continue to revisit those policies, see how they interact with the current events, and to make sure you're up to date with your practices. And even if it's, sometimes I look back to things that were implemented during the years that I've been employed with the agency, things like ensuring that your interview questions are not biased, that you have skill-based interview questions, so that, and even bias training presented to your management team to ensure that when you're looking at a resume, that you're not weeding out like things that may identify someone's religion or practices or things that they engage in, to knock those biases down. And it's just ever evolving, and continue to look at your practices and what you can do to make your organization better and ensure that you're not discriminating. It's continued steps.
How about you, Maureen? What any particular event, or what was it that made you decide? And talk a little bit about the process that NYSED has been through.
So I came on as CEO here 2 years ago. NYSED's been around 45 years, 46 years, and I'm the first female CEO that the organization's ever had. So I was clearly bringing a different thought process to the job. The exact incident that occurred, I know we always had diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think, in the master plan here and in the strategic plan. How directly engaged on it we were, I'm not totally clear before my time, but I had an event that occurred. I let a consultant go. I didn't renew their contract, and the consultant was unhappy about it, called a board member. A board member called me and said, I think you need to go have lunch with the consultant and see if you can smooth this over. I'm not sure the message was delivered the right way. And I quote, because you're kind of hard charging. So After I took the call, I kind of put the phone down and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to deal with this like in the first 3 months on the job. And I said to the board member, have you ever called a man hard charging? And as your CEO, don't you want me to be hard charging? Because this was not getting us anywhere. We were spending money on something that we shouldn't be spending money on. So after I kind of went through this exercise, I thought we really need diversity, equity, and inclusion training for everybody, not just all of the staff. I need it for leadership, board as well. So we started that right away and we did DEI training, and it was, I think, eye-opening for everybody. And then we made it a goal of the organization, and it's tied to compensation. So I must meet specific DEI and inclusion strategies regularly in order to meet the requirements of my contract. For individual staff members, it is part of their regular review process. So when they are reviewed annually, how did they make that division or department that they run more inclusive? How did they create better teamwork? One of the other things we do is I encourage members of the executive staff here to sit on boards and to engage in charitable endeavors and learn other things about the organizations we work with. I never make them take vacation time for that. So I say, if you're going to go do this and you're going to give back and you're going to be part of something that is not something you know too much about, you don't have to take a day off to do that. You don't have to take personal time to do that. So it's making it part of the review process, everything they do being part of, again, our culture here to move it forward. But I did have an incident that made me realize we had to prioritize it faster than I thought we were going to have to.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes happens. You may be aware that things could be different, but there are other initiatives and there are other priorities. And then you have something that just smacks you upside the head that says, you know what, I can't ignore this any longer.
Yep.
And you talked a little bit about another question we're going to ask, which is about the enforcement piece. And I hate to use that word enforcement, but the problem is when you start anything culturally, the question always has to be is where's the accountability piece of it? You just described that in vivid detail about what your expectation is for the accountability factor in terms of holding people accountable to it in terms of their goals and their own metrics in their role, whether that's at the leadership level, et cetera. And I think that's key to enforcing when someone's asking about what's this transition as a culture. Yes, we can begin a transition. How do you keep it alive? And then how do you hold people accountable? So Delphia, would you weigh in on that too?
Yeah, I think that we have fortunately and or unfortunately realized that in most organizations don't just wake up and say, hey, you know what? I think I want to focus on diversity and inclusion. There's usually some type of reason behind it. And in my experiences, I'm usually called on when there's a legal issue, when there's, some type of claim, et cetera. And, that's good in one way because, okay, the realization came about, right? But secondly, that's a challenge because, that usually that means that there's been a number of years, a lot of time for which people have had to develop the thought process of how things should exist and things should be within the organizations. And so I think that it's important to really at the very baseline, I take everything back to very basic elements, at least I try to, and say, at our core, who are we? That's the bottom line. Who are we? And if we aren't who we are today, who we see ourselves as, or how we expect to be, then what do we need to do to change it? I think that's the bottom line. And I feel like I answered your question. If I didn't, please let me know. But I think that at the very core, that's it.
You brought up a good point, which is, quote, the bottom line. So whether you're for-profit or not-for-profit, my next question is, I'm going to go back now to where we were before in terms of our questions, which is, so can you tell a story about or make the case for how important diversity is in a success that you've seen in your organization, or just in general, the bottom line? Either way, I'd be interested. And Delphia, if you would continue on.
Yeah, I think it's essential. It truly is. You know, we can look at research, we can look at the statistics, everything that you look at, everything that you read is going to tell you that by focusing on the bottom line of diversity and inclusion, adding diversity and inclusion, thought process and activity to all of your practices, policies, et cetera, you are going to increase so many elements of your business to create sustainability, et cetera. So there's no question about that. It's been proven. You know, we can try to pretend that it hasn't, but it has time and time again, not just here in the United States, not just here in New York, not, you know, on the East Coast. It has been proven consistently. And so I think that that's the key, is realizing that, you know what, these numbers aren't lying. They're not lying. They're not telling us a fabrication just to get us to say, hey, diversity and inclusion is important, just to get us to say that we now need to value and recognize people. These numbers are telling a story that has been really being solidified throughout the history of our time. But now there's a great opportunity for a greater realization. So I think that that's the key. Rely on the facts.
Right. And I think there's a huge connection with knowing the population that you serve. And I'll go on the for-profit side and saying that understanding that population is essential to not missing certain things. Many moons ago, I worked for, I'm going to sound like I'm on Wheel of Fortune now, a major clothing retailer, Pat. I worked for a major retail clothing entity, and in their global distribution division. We took a huge bath one year because we had these new line of pants that came out. And when they rolled out in different markets, we realized some of the mistakes that we had made in not understanding the market. We took a huge bath down in Florida, specifically in the Miami area, where there's a larger Hispanic population, of which the inseam that tend to be shorter individuals, and the inseam was like usually around 30 inches. Yet we had released all of these 32, 34 length, all of these types of pants and so forth into the market. And we took a bath on them because no one bought them, because no one wants to buy pants that long and you have to cut them off or have to have them hemmed or something. And that's a stupid story maybe. And at the same time, an understanding of, do you know your population? Do you know your population? And that is the bottom line, you know, absolutely. Rochelle, would you add to that?
Yeah, sure. You know, we're touching upon the bottom line and how diversity and inclusion positively, it's a known fact that incorporating diversity and inclusion will have a positive impact on the bottom line. And I know you started off by asking to talk about achievements and successes that our organizations may have experienced with incorporating diversity and inclusion. And it makes me stop and think about a major success and achievement with CP Nassau. And the number is back in 2018, we celebrated our 70th year anniversary. And that's major. And that speaks volumes to know that you have an organization that was founded with a diverse group of women looking to create an organization for their children with diverse needs that need to be met, and having contributors and volunteers. And even then, it took for a variation of individuals to come together to create what we have today. And it just, you know, speaks to having the focus on a goal and keeping a mission in mind, and then taking in the feedback and input of many individuals to factor in that diversity and inclusion, and realizing how positively it will affect the bottom line and towards our future success. And it's so important that, you know, we keep that in mind and realize I can think about many achievements even along the way where teams of people have to join together, the programs that we offer, the variety services, our residential programs, where it was not one person that's able to do that, but it's a diverse group of people. So even 70 years in, it's a continuation, and it brings us back to our culture. and knowing that that's our foundation, and that as long as we remember together we shine, that realize that together we're able to do so much, together we're able to work better. And it's just important that, that's continued for our future success.
Great, thank you. And Maureen, you were talking before about your education assistance program, which has been a great success.
Mhm.
Anything else that you can think about where the inclusion piece of this really made a contribution in terms of a success or an achievement?
Yeah, a good story would be, and Rochelle said it, remember your mission. So the mission of our organization is to help individuals with disabilities secure employment. And we're an organization that does that with our member agencies and government contracts. But inside of our own shop here, what are we doing to secure employment within the 71 employees I have here for individuals with disabilities? So we did an internship program last summer with the Autism Society of the Capital Region. And we brought in 3 interns that worked for us over the summer. And, I knew they were all going to be fine doing the job. I knew that the team would include them and it would all work out fine. I knew that the team would be sensitive to certain things that the individuals who were coming in needed. What I didn't expect was the way that those individuals would change the culture and change people within our organization. We brought one fella on full time. So Chris Payne works for us full time now. He is a fantastic employee, and he has single-handedly helped some folks who had no barriers to employment understand how great a job they have because they've had no barriers to employment. So Chris created an attitude change that I couldn't have paid a consultant for, which I could not have created through an awards program. It was created because he was here and he was super happy to be part of a team and in a job. And it changed everybody around him to the positive. So remember your mission and try to do it inside your own house.
Right. And what you're talking about is hearts and minds.
Yeah, it's hearts and minds. Yeah.
Big world to change. And we've had a couple really great comments in the chat there about that very thing, which is you have to get people on board with certain things themselves, their mentality, their outlook. And that is in some ways offsetting an entire lifetime of a different experience.
Correct.
And so
Correct.
changing hearts and minds is a different thing. And I honestly believe, I love that story because I honestly believe that you change hearts and minds with exposure to other people who they have to live with and or work with and towards whatever. It could be a common goal. It's just working side by side. And you start to realize that things you thought about people are just not the case because this individual shows you that.
Correct.
But how many people get that opportunity? That's another story, right? That's another story. So thank you. That's a great example of that concept. So I'm going to talk a little bit. Maureen already talked a little bit about the reinforcement piece of this in terms of including and weaving it through metrics and goals that people have, and that they're held accountable to through the performance management program that they have at NYSED. So Rochelle, if you would talk a little bit about, and I understand you have something you'd like to share with us, talk a little bit about promoting inclusion, and I mean literally promoting it. Like, I don't mean philosophically, but how do you show and reflect that the organization is committed to inclusion? And then maybe talk a little bit about enforcement as well. So I think Tim is going to help you show us something that helps respond to that particular question.
Yes. When promoting inclusion, what's important, you just touched on it, is the engagement with the employees and getting people involved and giving them the opportunity to engage with people around the organization. And what I think about is, right now, I'm just thinking about my own personal experience. I was listening to you so deeply, I just started thinking about my own experience in the agency, and that I did have the opportunity where there were other individuals before me that were inviting me to participate on committees. and pushing me to get more involved in events. And I can honestly say I would not be the employee that I am today had I not had, I wouldn't be the person I am today. I'm going ahead saying that I'm a good employee and a good person. But I would not be that had I not had that opportunity for that exposure that you just mentioned. That exposure allows us to interact with other people and having that opportunity. And sometimes we've taken on the role. I've been in an experience where I've pushed individuals to join a committee. You know, if someone can share with a manager that they have these brilliant ideas and, you know, they're reserved and hesitant and joining a committee where their voice can be heard or they have a seat at the table, as Delphia mentioned earlier. And I believe that in our organization, there's always an opportunity to get people involved. Recently, we had an initiative we had a strategic planning initiative led by Karen Geller-Hittelman, our Assistant Executive Director. And it wasn't a group of executives that was looking at the mission of the agency or our values or our vision statement. It consisted of the individuals we serve, team members that were employed for various number of years that filled various positions, board members, family members, parents, members of our council of auxiliary. And that was a recent example that we've had the opportunity of including many individuals and fostering that exposure that you're talking about. That's just one experience that we had more recently. But, you know, what I'm thinking about also is during the current time and promoting inclusion, we all know that in March, we were faced with some trying times with this pandemic. And I think a lot of us with our workforce were posed with technology challenges, as well as, you know, keeping the employees involved, engaged, and a sense of transparency of knowing what was going on, and reminding them that even though we're distant, that you're still a part of something great. And when I thought about this question, I did share with Tim a video that I wanted to share with everyone that just touches my heart, because even with distance between us, our development team and our administrators ensured that we were still able to apply our mission and be reminded of what we were doing even during a pandemic. So we do have a video, if Tim could share that screen, of, you know, our workforce coming together and feeling part of something and included despite a pandemic, despite working in their homes. And even with that one experience, what was amazing about it was it made you feel even more connected to individuals that you may have passed in a hallway. But from this video coming together, you were able to see individuals with their family members in their home, their front yards, and it made you feel included even from a distance. So I did want to share that with you guys today. So Tim, if you have it, feel free to share a minute or so of this video of our workforce.
Great. Thanks, Rachel.
See if Tim has it.
I'm not even muted. I'm not muted.
I see the light in each of your
Tim, was everyone able to see the visuals then?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to share that because it's just, something that I have it bookmarked on my desktop, because it's just a constant reminder of the inclusion, on a certain platform where, it's almost every little thing matters. And so it was, something that came to mind to share, that even from a distance, you want to ensure that even through a pandemic, you remember your mission, your culture, and to keep employees involved and informed so that they're reminded that they're a part of something and feel included, and that they have the opportunity to participate in these if they would like.
That's fantastic. Thank you. We really appreciate you sharing that with us. You're right, during a difficult time. I was just working with a client this morning, and they said straight up to me, we let everything that was going on take over the things we knew were important, like more regular check-ins with our employees, even having more manager meetings. Because it's more difficult, right? Because it takes more of an effort, because yes, we have to make sure we set up the Zoom or the MS Teams or whatever platform we're using, but we cannot let that mission slip between our fingers, especially missions like the ones that you represent. And I think that's very true. Delphia, in your role, or even with clients, have you seen how people have been able to promote and reinforce once they get started on this, journey of developing a culture devoted to celebrating diversity and inclusion and equity? What have you seen out there?
I've seen it ebbs and flows, quite honestly, because this is a fatiguing arena.
Yeah.
It can be very exhausting. You have to have thick skin. You have to be prepared for, to change on the dime. But what I have seen very positively is that when people are committed to it and you engage the right people on the bus that are part of this journey, then, there's no stopping you. I think one of the most important things is to realize it's a journey that does not have an end destination. It doesn't have a milestone marker that you're going to hit and say, we've reached diversity and inclusion and we're done, because it changes consistently because you are dealing with individuals. So what I've seen in my experiences and my background is that those that are committed, those that realize that you're in this for a long haul, those that make long-term goals for their strategy, those are the ones that are more successful than the ones that, go for the short stint and say by June, we're going to reach all of our diversity and inclusion goals. And then that's it.
Yeah, great. So we're going to wrap up with one final question, and please keep any more coming that you have, either through the Q&A or through chat. They've been fantastic. They've really, I appreciate the nuances of being able to kind of piggyback on what we're talking about. So the last question that we have really revolves around the IDD population, trying to understand, so how do we involve that population, whether they are the people that we serve, their family members, corporate and community partners, et cetera. How do you go about including them in your diversity, inclusion, and equity initiatives? Maureen, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think we're at a really interesting crossroads. The industry that serves the IDD population, and I think that it was heightened by the pandemic. This population was not prioritized during the pandemic, and I'll use an example. We were figuring out in the state how to open hair salons before individuals with disabilities who lived in group homes could be visited by their families. It is tragic the way that our folks were ruled out during this process. I think we as an industry have to work more closely together to figure out how we get the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at the state level to recognize and include the IDD population. I do a ton of work with the state, and I think that the MWBE programs they run are extraordinary and extremely important, but the ones that are run for the IDD population have to be as extraordinary and as extremely important. And I think After this pandemic, during this pandemic, what we're doing right now has highlighted a lot of those inequities. And I think we need to, lack of a better term, capitalize on what has occurred here and utilize it to bring more attention to the population and the people we serve.
Yeah, absolutely. How would you add to that, Rochelle? What did you?
Maureen is right on target, where we have seen the IDD population underserved during this, especially during this pandemic. And ways that stakeholders can get more involved is to the family members, the individuals themselves, is we didn't get to where we are today without a fight. So it's important that they join us in our organizations in the fights and the causes that whether it's advocacy teams, whatever it may be, but joining us in the fight to continue the services to the point of where we've gotten today. So there's so many ways that they can get involved, and it's important that organizations reach out to those families and let them know, be transparent as to what we're faced with. Oftentimes during these days, there is that it's a given that these services will be there. And sometimes I stop and I think it's beautiful that we have families that, we've gotten to the point where it's an automatic. It's not even a second thought of a service being provided. And we've gotten so far of where it is. But I believe Bob McGuire, our executive director, touched on this morning that, we have to almost give a history lesson so that they realize how we got to where we are today, so that history does not repeat itself. So there are so many ways that they can get involved in understanding the diversity and inclusion in the agency and being participating members themselves. And we'll continue to, reach out to them and ensure that they have the opportunity to be involved.
Rochelle, I agree with the history lesson. I feel like I'm doing that more and more and more, saying, okay, look, we came so far from Willowbrook.
Yeah.
Like, we cannot repeat that. We have to continue to move forward. And I feel like this is we're at a standstill a little bit sometimes.
You're right.
And do you think the standstill has come from what's happened this year? That it's taken maybe a breather, a stoppage to talk about essential versus non-essential, that people might have made that judgment somewhere in their mind?
I think the standstill partially comes from what has happened this year. I think it's a side effect of the financial crunch. So a lot of the services that are provided for individuals with disabilities are funded through Medicaid, and there is a lot of trimming that's happening without input from the community as to how this may affect them. So it's happening, then we're reacting to it rather than being in front of it saying, look, these are why these programs are important and they can't be touched. And I think, again, it presents us with an opportunity as an industry to work together on what are those kind of 6 major issues that we have to make sure everybody is educated on effectively so that this isn't happening going forward.
And Delphia, I'm going to let you wrap up. You work with a lot of different people. You work in your consultancy, you've worked with a lot of different clients, you've worked with some clients who are providers, et cetera. How have you seen people both promote the inclusion, talk about inclusion, of the population and their families and people in the community?
I think that it's what I've seen is really kind of a triad. I think of it, if we have the organization, we have the family, and we have the individual, making sure that all 3 of those entities are included and a part of the discussions, a part of the opportunities, and a part of the vision for going forward. The best, and I shouldn't say the best clients, but the best, the most productive engagements that I've had have been those that have truly found a way to find those connecting pieces for all of those entities, and not leaving the voice, as we've talked about earlier, not leaving the voice of 1 out or 2 out in the best interest of one particular entity. You have to have all of that. You have to have all of the voices in the room. And that's what I've seen that has been the most successful, both in my practice, also with the organizations that I have been employed by to focus on diversity and inclusion. You have got to include that triad.
Great, thank you. And I think we've all had a lot of things to think about, and I cannot thank you, all of you, enough. Thanks for sharing us some of your stories and some of the ways in which, and some of the triggering things, right, that that told us that we needed to do more work in this area. I want to thank you, all of you, for participating. I really appreciate that. I will hand it back over to Bill, who will have a closing remark.
Yes, thank you very much. On behalf of CP State and our 24 statewide affiliates, thank you to Elaine, Delphia, Maureen, and Rachel for their participation and wealth of information provided in this session. That was a great session. I really enjoyed it. And thank you again to the Beacon Group, Focus Wealth Management, and Total Care RX for their support of CP State. Thank you and have a great afternoon. We'll see you at tomorrow's sessions.
Bye.
Bye.